All right. Welcome back, everyone, to another episode of. I think when I first recorded this with a friend, it was like we called it the Could Be Wrong podcast because the concept being that like whatever we're saying, it could be wrong, and there's like that humility aspect to it. But I'm just gonna roll with that name. But today we have a special guest with us. You have for me to use your first name, or you're going to go full anonymous?
That's fine.
Okay, so it's my friend Karry. She is a teacher in Melbourne who has been here for how many years now? 4 years. And originated from, where are you from, Karry? China. And so, yeah, we wanted to have a conversation, just talk about, basically about China. And or anything that you would be interested in talking about as well.
Yes, sure.
But yes, so I guess I'll start with the easy question. Why did you decide to become a Chinese spy?
Oh, that's the question.
Yeah.
Think about it. I think it's super cool being a spy, no matter it's a Chinese spy, Australian spy, or the US spy. But I just found it's really hard to get in, and how do you know you're actually a spy?
Right. So someone sends you an email
Yes.
saying, would you like to sign up with the Chinese spy agency? And for all you know, it could just be some random dude in another country.
The same thing, like you get an email say you want this Android phone, you should click this link to get your prize. That would be the same thing. How do you know that's an actual, genuine email?
It could be a scam, actually. That's a good idea for a scam where it's like, I'm Xi Jinping.
Yes.
I want you to be my spy, but you got to wire $200 just to verify that you're in on this properly, kind of thing.
Exactly. And if you're not trained by someone from primary school as what you saw in the film, how do you know you are the one? And it's hard to believe anything special about me will make myself a qualified spy. Like, I'm just a normal teacher working normal work.
That might be
school.
That might actually be the best possible occupation because no one would suspect a teacher, and you could be like reporting back on just small things like, oh, the kids at school are all watching this rapper named Young Lean. I don't know what that's about, but just random little. I don't know what spies are supposed to be doing, but my understanding is that I think there are some Chinese spies in Australia. I think there's just spies everywhere from every country. I think most of them are just doing like just basic reporting back. Like here's like almost like a little diary thing, and they're like,
Well, I think if that's all they need, they can just simply go to the social media because people share their lives on social media. That's much easier.
It's a good point.
And bigger data as well. Bigger database. Instead of going to this particular person and get some biased perspective as well.
Yeah, I wonder why they do that.
Why they do that.
Yeah. That's funny. So that's good to know. It's a good start to the conversation. So I do want to talk about like things where like one of the things I want to get out of this is to work out, like I talk to my friends about China every now and then. China. Yes. And there's never a Chinese person in the room who can tell us when we're going off the rails on the conspiracy theories and things like that. So I want to throw some things out there and just get your take and just see what you think about it. So I think the first thing is, we've talked about this in the past, but it'd be good to rehash it, is about Taiwan.
That's how it starts.
That's where it all began.
Yeah.
So Taiwan is like, I believe Taiwan itself says that it's its own country, like an independent country, but China is of the opinion that that's not the case. It's part of China. China wants to quote unquote have a peaceful reunification with it. China is not democratic in the sense that we think of a democracy, whereas Taiwan is more stereotypically democratic. And so what is your take on the whole situation? A lot of people are angry about this situation. They're angry that Taiwan feels this pressure from China. And what's your take?
Well, so firstly, I am not someone super interested in politics, and I have very limited experience, very limited view as well. And for the second, I think people's ideas, people's beliefs purely depends on the education they have, what they've been told over years, what people told them over years, what they saw in the social media and the newspaper, what everything is. So we start from an example. I saw something yesterday online, is a picture of newspapers saying 2 Chinese new young stars, like female stars. They're just like stars in they're maybe around the same age. They have no connection at all. But then in this English newspaper, they said they are the richest and the first lesbian couple in China.
What?
And saying a totally different story. It is so funny. And in reality, those 2 stars, they are just the new stars. They become popular around the similar years, but they have no connection. And there's no way they are the richest lesbian couple at all. So I just want to use this example to show how views, how things can be very, very different when things are reported in different languages.
Right. Not just languages, right? Like also just like
culture, different perspective.
Yeah.
It could be very, very different as this story. So I would say the same thing about Taiwan in terms of the relationship between Thailand and mainland China is completely different stories from a English perspective or from a Chinese perspective.
Right.
Yes.
So I guess the Western perspective, to my understanding, is that China is like bullying Taiwan. Taiwan has some credible claim to being an independent country because of just there's like some historical things where like they got occupied by Japan, and Japan gave it back, and it wasn't clear who Japan gave it back to. But then also just like the right to self-determination. So, you know, I think the West is concerned about China getting impatient and putting troops on the ground in Taiwan and trying to take over their government and install their own head of state, basically. Because they would see that as like basically overthrowing. It'd be like invading a country and toppling their the government, basically. So is that something that, from the Chinese perspective, is that even on people's minds as being an option?
No, I don't think so. I don't think that's the case. From my limited experience from Chinese media, what we've been told, the story is the whole thing of Taiwan trying to be independent is like supported by Western countries, aka the US.
The US?
Yeah. And I think there are certain benefits of them getting Taiwan independent instead of part of China. Because I think these days a lot of Western countries see China as a
bully.
Not like bully. It's like when you are both strong, you see someone as a competitor.
Yeah.
You are annoyed by them, but at the same time you're scared by them as well. So you tend to say things about them in order to get your position.
Yes. You try to cut them down a bit. Yeah.
If China is the same country, like a small Asian country, have no harm to Western world, then why I care about these things? Like for example, there are many things, similar things happening in other countries, but why we don't care about it? Why you can't see that in the social media? Why people are not getting angry about it? Why China and Taiwan? Why is the case?
That's a good question.
Have you ever thought about it? Why people don't talk about it, angry about it, critique about it? We care about it because it is China. But why China? What's the difference between China and the other countries? Is that just because China has developed so much in the past 20 years in all sort of perspective? That's why people get scared. And then that's why when something happened about China that's not that great, then we have to critique it, cut it down, and we have to, fight for it.
Yeah, I think that's fair. Like there are a lot of countries that are non-democratic. We're not spending a whole lot of time bemoaning the fact that they're not democratic. And so you could argue like, okay, let's say China does invade Taiwan, topples the government, installs some puppet leader. You could argue like, well, it's one more dictatorship, but it's like we didn't care too much about the other ones. But there is something very visceral in my mind about just the act of invading a country and putting military on the ground and denying their right to self-determination. And I'm imagining the obvious corollary at the moment is like Russia and Ukraine. Pretty much the entire world is like agreeing that Russia probably should not have invaded Ukraine, and you can say it was strategically a bad move, but I think everyone agrees it's like morally a bad move. Even China, I don't believe said, I think they were like neutral on whether they should be condemning Russia, but they certainly weren't in favor of it, which was interesting because, you know, if China wants to go ahead and take over Taiwan in proper, they probably will need to adopt a similar stance to what Russia's doing at the moment. But I guess I just want to use that as an example to say people really don't want countries to be invaded these days. And I think even putting the democracy thing to the side, I think people often just see it as bad. Like even Afghanistan, people are pretty embarrassed about. You know, when the US went in there after the whole 9/11 thing. I think that was 9/11. I'm not pretending to be good at history.
Yes. I think in terms of invasion, I think from what I've heard in the media, whatever, I never think China will invade Taiwan. That's never a thing. Mm-hmm. I would be so surprised if that actually happens. And I genuinely not sure why people are saying that in English or sort of other things, because I don't think that's a thing at all. Yeah, that's the same thing like people say Chinese people eating dogs.
I think that was true, but is less true now, in the sense that I think Chinese people have more cats and dog pets, and that just culturally means they're less likely to eat dogs.
Alright, now let's tell you this story about it. So, first, do you know how big China is?
1.4 billion.
Yeah, and it's huge land, right? And there are many provinces, and within each province there are many cities. So, for example, the province I come from has maybe 12 or 13 cities.
Yep.
And every city is very different.
Yeah.
We can tell each other's accent.
Yeah.
Like you can tell my accent here. So the stories about Chinese so-called quotation mark Chinese people eating dogs. So the whole story starts from there is a small country town, like a very small country town.
Yeah.
They have this tradition of eating dogs. And in the past, people didn't know that because, you know, it's not like very big city and the media is not like everywhere. Until like a few years ago, some maybe I think internet influencer posted online.
Yep.
And then it became a huge story. Like everyone in China is so angry about this small country town, about the people in the small country town eating dogs. And lots of lawyers, they try to work together and work against it.
Yeah.
So in China, the story is everyone got shocked.
Yeah.
And angry about how come this small little place, those people have this festival about eating dogs.
It's a festival?
They said this is a festival, like a dog festival, something like that. And it's like, they're so angry about it, so we all work around it, and I think eventually there are like a law specifically about this after that thing. Yeah. It's like a protest, it's a big thing. But then
and then at some point the West finds out.
When I come to Australia, I saw this news in English saying Chinese people eating dogs. That's not the same. That's not the same. I would say that probably the same thing maybe. It's like indigenous people have special culture, have special thing, or this small group of people have different things. So for example, if they don't like chicken, then you can't say Australian don't like chicken. That's the thing.
Yeah.
If some people living
Yeah, it's
in
like you Australians with your
beef,
didgeridoos and your kangaroos.
Then you won't say Australian hate beef. That's the thing. I think people tend to overgeneralize China a lot.
Yes.
No matter what they see, what they heard, then they will say, oh, that's about the whole Chinese. That's about the whole population living in China, which I cannot agree at all.
Yeah, and is that just because, like, I'm thinking about, like, other countries, like the US is a big place. We genuinely know that it's got, like, there's 50 states, and that Texas is a very different place to, say, you know, Washington or the East Coast. And I think people... Yeah, I think maybe part of that is because we're just getting a lot of, like, we're getting shows that come through and you can tell the show is made in Texas or some other place. And because we get a lot of, like, cultural content from America. And
you speak the same language, so you can even tell the different accent in different states in the US. But that's the exactly same thing in China.
Yeah.
Similar land size, but way more people. So that would cause even more difference.
Yeah. But it sounds. I think part of the issue is just that China often feels like it's kind of living in its own world. And I think most of that is because of the language barrier. But it's like, I don't think China shares any major news sources with the Western world. I mean, yes, obviously the Communist Party controls much of the media. But even if it didn't, even if it does. China does not export a whole lot of cultural stuff from what I've seen. Like, you get a couple of movies, and I could be so wrong about this, but, like, there's, you know, Japan and Korea export a lot of interesting movies and things where you can get a glimpse into things, but I feel like China is a black box to many people. And because of that, we just generalize. We just say, oh, we saw this story, we're going to assume that applies to the whole of China. And it's possible that if the language barrier was gone and there was more exchange of the cultural information, that could ameliorate that process. But I honestly don't know. Maybe people just have a bone to pick with China and they're looking for excuses to, you know, generalize the whole place.
That's the thing. Like, if I say, do you know some people eat bats?
In China?
See, that's the thing. If I'm talking people eating bats, you think about China, right?
Well, okay, China is the topic of our conversation. I think it's a fair... And also, wasn't there someone who tried to eat a bat? Wasn't some COVID thing where someone, like, ate a bat and that literally caused COVID?
Not true.
Not true?
That's not
Don't
true.
quote me on that.
I was like, I think, you see, Indonesia, I definitely can't recall. They're in one of the Asian country. One of the popular signature dish is bat.
Okay.
Yes. And I can 100% say that's not China. That's the thing.
What is it?
Why we never critique those countries eating bats?
I don't even mind if you're eating bats, as long as it doesn't cause a global pandemic.
Then that's the thing. Like, why we don't care something that is not politically that right from other countries? There are huge amount of things happening.
Yeah.
But then why you think about something that wrong or someone did something wrong in China, then people never let it go.
They do have a bone to pick.
They generalize it and say that's the whole China's problem.
Yeah. And just for the record, maybe somebody ate a pangolin, if that's how you pronounce it, and that...
What's pangolin?
Some bizarre animal. I don't know what they look like. But I think then a bat, maybe... I don't know how it worked. But anyway, we can put that to the side. It is the case that, like, I'm not hearing about what's happening in Myanmar. I know there's, like, I think genocides and a lot of political turmoil, but I'm just not hearing much about that country in general. And I think part of that is just because it's not a competitor to the West. You know what I mean? Like, I think we spend a lot of time thinking about Russia and China because they actually have enough strength to contend with the West in a serious way. And so we spend a lot of our time thinking about those places. And I also think that because we perceive them as a threat, we're more likely to engage with news, like articles and things like that paint them in a negative light.
Yes, and I also think it's about, the relationships here. Like, do you know WTO?
World Trade Organization?
Yes, and I think for Japan and Korea, I'm not sure when they are part of this, But then for China, it only become part of this after 2000.
I wonder what took them so long.
Yes. So, and I think that's gonna be the thing. If you're not part of the group, then I guess it's hard to really show yourself, to share the cultural media, everything, film.
Yeah, well, I assume the WTO had some kind of... I know that China was devaluing its currency for a very long time, and that did piss off the West because it meant that it was very lucrative to import from China, and that hurt some of the industries in the US. But perhaps that was some of the reason why it took them so long to get into the WTO.
But then just don't import from China.
Well, yeah, I mean, you can use tariffs, I suppose.
Yeah, like you want to import it and then you blame it.
Yeah.
Then if you don't feel that's fair, then don't import it.
That is true. It is speculation. Like, I think actually everyone has the right to devalue their own currency. But maybe the WTO just has certain rules of the game where they were like, you can't do that. Or maybe it was more about accounting and like, you know, can we trust the numbers you guys produce? I don't know.
It's just a lot of historical reason. When there are more activities happening between countries, they can easily share the things together, so they can be exposed more as well. But as you said before, China has their own bubbles. So I guess it's hard to really show people what China's like.
Yes. Yeah. Do you think that like the fact that China is an autocracy affects like the amount of creativity? I'm just thinking about like Japan and Korea do pretty good at getting lots of really fantastic like shows and TV and movies out. China, it seems to me, doesn't do that as well. And I'm wondering, is that at all, like, you know, is it because as a director, I'm afraid to make a certain plot because it might implicitly criticize the government? Like,
yeah, I think that's true. It's hard for a director to make something like that. Even though it maybe has to be very subtle, otherwise you won't have the opportunity to get it on public.
Right. So it's like a financial risk, right? If I'm someone trying to fund a movie, the thing could be shut down by the government, and that could be a concern.
Yeah. So like one example is my friends are watching a new show. So and then because for certain reasons a lot of plot get cut before it went public.
A lot of what got cut?
Plot.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, just like romantic plot.
Really?
Yes.
That's weird.
Or maybe it's like normal
straight couple?
No.
There you go. I think China's got an issue with LGBTQ
no,
whatever.
It's not straight couple. It's not even straight couple. It's just like a normal.
Oh wait, sorry. I'm saying like, was it like a gay couple?
No.
Oh, so just a normal.
Oh, no, sorry. Straight couple.
Okay, a straight couple
just
and
some romantic scene and.
That's bizarre.
But there are some historical reason. Yes, it's a bit. Yeah.
Well, they were like, we should take down the government, and they like kissed, and it's like that's not gonna work, guys.
But then they just sometimes you watch some show and then you say, oh, hang on, why these two things are not connected?
Yeah.
And then you go online and then maybe they cut something off.
What the hell?
So I personally hate that. But then so unfortunate that something happened, and I do agree what you're saying.
Yeah. So that's interesting because I'm thinking about like the value or like how many of these issues with China can just be traced back to the fact that it's not a democracy. And first of all, I've seen online some people will say like, oh, China actually is a democracy. It's just that you can't choose different parties. There's a single party and you choose the representatives within that party. And it's like, well, I'm open to the idea that is a legitimate form of democracy, but there's something very weird about the fact that as a voter, I can't have some sway on whether like the top dog gets thrown out, Xi Jinping specifically. So, but I do wonder like if China became a democracy tomorrow, how much would actually change? Like I actually feel like the people of China have a bone to pick with the West, and that even if even if Xi Jinping was out of power and there was a democracy and people were voting for their own politicians, I suspect they would actually elect someone who's very hard line against the West and very antagonistic towards it.
Well, I think I wouldn't say China will be better if it turn into democracy tomorrow, because the whole nation is not ready for that. That's the thing, like in democracy world, you learn about critical thinking. You have all these skills built up from school. You know, picking things, you know how to make the choice. But then in China, that's not something we learn. That's not some of the skills. Like sometimes I just joke with my friends, the difference between permanent resident and citizenship in Australia, the only two differences.
In one, you're allowed to be stupid.
Passport, and the other one is voting rights.
Right.
But if you ask any Chinese people, they couldn't care less about voting rights.
Right.
Because they are not built up in that way.
Yep.
So I think if China becomes democracy, people will get crazy. How to make appropriate choice. How to tell the truth and lie. Yes, that's the thing. So I think it might not be great, or it definitely not be great being the way it is now, but it might not be better be the other way.
Yeah.
Because the nation is not ready.
Yeah. I think being a democracy has a lot of costs. One of them is that you'll have all these really annoying political friends who try to, just who have very strong political beliefs. And it does get very tiring whenever there's an election cycle, just all the media and stuff around that, super annoying. But it is kind of nice to know that your government isn't going to, I don't know, open fire on its own citizens, that kind of stuff, which I think is more likely if you have a dictator. But at the same time, you think about like China, if I'm correct, is like majority Han Chinese, right? So it might not even be good for China to have a majority Han Chinese population that wants to oppress the minorities, for example. So just saying that everyone has an equal voting, the right to vote, doesn't necessarily fix certain problems. They can just be based on demographics.
Exactly.
So yes, that is interesting. I should be clear in saying I think democracy is fantastic on net. I think it's just a lot harder for things to go wrong with a democracy than it can for a dictatorship. Like, for example, I just can't imagine the war in Ukraine happening right now with an elected leader, as opposed to Putin, who's not elected. I mean, I suppose he technically, you could say that he is, because Russia says they hold elections, but they don't really. So, yeah. But it is interesting to think about, like, some countries just don't have a taste of democracy and they're not even aware of what they're missing out on. And it's not intuitive to me, but that's just because I've been raised in a democracy. And
yes, as you said, you are raised in democracy, so you are well educated in terms of democracy. But then for some countries who's never been in that situation, people don't even know what democracy means.
It's also tricky because like I'm a believer that critical thinking, not only can it not be taught, but that most people probably don't even have it. There's a lot of people out there who are just not that bright, but who still can vote. And I'm not really bothered by that, because I don't think you need to have that much intelligence to even make a vote on what you care about. Like, if you just look at some policies and go, oh, this thing affects me in a good way, this thing affects me in a bad way, I'll choose the party that has the policy that I like, and I won't choose the other party. I'm not really convinced that critical thinking is super important to a democracy.
No, because not everything you see, you read are true.
Yeah.
But then if you don't have critical thinking, you just believe whatever given to you.
Maybe.
Then you're gonna make not very wise options, I guess. That's why people think, I'm not sure, when people talk about there are a few different newspapers and different newspapers have different perspective. And then if someone have no idea, then they just see newspapers information are the true real information.
But is there a lot of people out there like that? Like, I mean, it'd be impossible for someone to think that all media is legitimate and truthful because of just how obviously, incompatible different viewpoints are, right? Like you can watch Fox News and you can watch, what's a typical lefty thing? I don't know.
Google
Fox
News,
yes.
ABC News.
Yeah, sure. And it's impossible to look at those two things and not realize that there's two different worldviews that are kind of incompatible there. And so I feel like you kind of, whatever you end up watching, I think everyone implicitly knows they're kind of allowing for some confirmation bias. They're like, it's like almost like entertainment. It's like they want to just get more things that affirm their current worldview.
You were thinking this way, but in China, people will believe what they are reading from newspaper because that's certain called official information.
Man.
So that's the thing. Then you don't have a second thing to compare, so you wouldn't think, you wouldn't question, read the newspaper and say, is that a case? No.
Right.
We won't thinking
so
that
people
way.
actually read the newspaper, and I assume everyone's aware that
not be the newspaper, but their news.
Sure, news sources. Yeah. So I assume that they are aware that the Communist Party influences the media, or is that not the case?
They know that, and they also know they are, I don't know how to say it, the spies from other country. They start other opinions online, doing things differently.
Oh boy. So people in China they'll come across something, say some news website. They'll know that the government has influence on what the news thing is publishing, but they'll still read it nonetheless and just take it for granted, more or less. And then in the comment section is the idea that if someone's reading a comment which is actually saying, this whole article is bullshit, here's why, that they would suspect that it was caused by like foreign powers interfering.
Not necessarily. Not necessarily like that. But personal experience, I don't think when people read newspaper, like the official one, the mean one, people will think, that's bullshit.
Really?
Not necessarily the case.
Okay, even if it relates to the Communist Party, like I can imagine there's certain things where it's like, why would the Communist Party even lie about this really mundane thing that doesn't really reflect on them at all? But if something, do people have a different kind of threshold for when it's something about the government, like Xi Jinping?
They'll only talk about the good thing, and that's it.
Yeah.
In the newspaper, you all see the good things.
Yeah.
You can rarely see in the newspaper they critique something. No, not the case. Or they say report some crime, do some things, but in terms of the government, it's all about what they're doing. What's happening next is all quite promising, quite lovely content. So it feels like you live in a great world.
Yes.
Yeah.
That's interesting. And you're thinking like, China's so great. How come everyone shits on us all the time? Like everyone's trying to give us crap. We're just doing our thing. That is interesting.
Did you just feel like speechless?
I'm trying to
imagine.
Yeah, I'm trying to put myself in their shoes because in my mind, so there's this book called Not Born Yesterday by Hugo Mercier, I think his name is, where he makes the case of saying like, people are not stupid and they genuinely have a very good handle on when someone's trying to manipulate them or they're being lied to or anything like that. Even though people think that humans are all really gullible, his argument is actually, you can look at all these cases where it's like, people think that these people are gullible, but in reality they're actually not. So you're telling me actually, no, there really is a large number of people who are gullible, and...
No, I think these days people are realizing that. That's why there are more and more people moving overseas.
Okay.
That's for sure.
Yeah.
That's for sure. So, not necessarily in that way.
Okay, so if someone's from China and they've moved to Australia or to America, for example, is it a fair assumption to say that the reason they left is for political reasons, that they're like unhappy with the state of things, or is it more economic?
Both.
Okay.
Both. Yeah.
Okay, that makes sense. So, yeah. I'm just wondering, like, is it... So, like, of people who have moved from China to Australia, say, for example, are there some traits that are in common with those people compared to people in China on average? Like, are they more, say, more adventurous, for example, given the fact that they actually moved country and relocated?
I would say either more adventurous, but also not necessarily financially really well off, but at least financially capable to support them the life in Australia.
Okay, and probably intelligent, I would assume, because does the visa require that you fill some specialty occupation?
Either intelligent or wealthy, I guess.
Oh yeah, one of the two. Isn't that funny? That's Australia's strategy. Like, we're getting a lot of people with a lot of money who want to live here.
Either the smart ones or the rich ones.
Yeah.
Otherwise, why we want them?
Well, if they're wealthy, you would hope that somewhere along the line, one of their ancestors had some smarts to them, so...
No, they have this investment visa where you have to invest, quotation mark, to some Australian thing.
Wow.
A certain amount, then they don't care about English skills and what industry you work.
Man, it just boils my blood. But hey,
yeah,
it's good for the country because we get money.
Yeah, I would say for all the international students, will Australian government hate me saying that? I would say they invest, every international student, they actually invest in Australian education.
What do you mean by that? As in the fact that they're paying...
the amount of money they need to pay up front.
Yeah, I know that Australia's third largest export is education.
It's second.
Is it second now?
I don't know.
Maybe it was always second. I recall it being the third largest.
What's the first one?
I think it's just something boring, like petroleum or iron.
Or barley.
Barley? Is barley? Barley's not part of Australia. That's Indonesia.
I'm joking. No, barley.
Oh, barley. Oh, I'm so dumb. I can't even blame that on the accent. That's just me being... So, I want to talk about the one-child policy because you are an only child, but it's not because of the one-child policy. So, could you explain that for the audience?
That's actually my first favorite topic. So everyone knows one-child policy used to be a big thing in China over many years.
Do you know when it started?
After 1949, when the new Republic of China is I'm so bad at history. I'm the worst. Sorry. Okay, so when I talk to my friends in Australia and everyone just make assumption of, you're a single child, right? I say, yes, but it's a single child by choice. By
your choice?
By my parents' choice.
Yeah.
So here's the thing. People know China, but then people don't know in China there are 56 different ethnicities. And then one is the major one. The major one is Han, so which is about over 90% of the population is Han. And for myself, I'm Manchurian. And also there are some, what we call those people?
Indigenous?
No, it's not indigenous, who don't eat pig. They're
Jewish.
Okay, so anyway, another ethnicity doesn't eat pig. And so one-child policy, surprisingly, only applied to Han.
Okay.
So all the other 55 ethnicities have no one-child policy applied to them. So for example, in my extended family, I am the only child in my big families.
Right.
So all my cousins, they have siblings. My auntie, uncle, they have 2, 3 kids. But I am just the poor single child in my family. So that's the thing. So one-child policy is not a blanket rule, I would say. It's
it's been ended now, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
So it's been ended now. I would say it's terrible for my generation because that's why I think for me, even though it's by choice, eventually I'm the single child.
Yeah.
So I'm very desperate, like for friends, for people around the same age. Like,
it's brutal.
I just feel it's better to have someone there.
Yeah.
No matter you love them or you hate them, at least they are there.
Yeah.
So one big problem caused by one-child policy is these days, the young generations, like the people born after 1990, or those generations. So when they get married, then the thing becomes problematic because when the young couple get married, they have kids, And then because they are the single child, so they don't want their children to be the single child. So they tend to have more children.
Yeah.
But then they will face the pressure of raising the children, but also taking care of their parents.
And they've got four parents among a couple of two people,
exactly,
which is terrible.
Because they were the single kids.
Yeah.
So the couple need to take care of 2 children and 4 parents.
Yeah.
It's not necessarily only like financially, but also emotionally. Because think about everyone here, if you are not a single child, I mean, sometimes if you don't have time with your parents, you don't have time talking to them, provide them enough emotional care, then your siblings will. But then when you're the single one,
it's just you.
The thing fall onto your shoulders, so you have the whole thing.
Yeah.
So that's really difficult. I would say that's really difficult. It's not a thing, but then it still causes more like pressure on the people who were on that situation.
Yeah.
If that makes sense.
Yeah. There's a thing called the population pyramid, I think, where you just look at like years and then number of people in a given year of like a given age. And I suppose China now has a lot of people who are older, not a whole lot who are younger. And that means that it's going to be a health crisis on the horizon.
Because of the pressure, some young people wouldn't want to have kids, or they couldn't afford having a kid as well.
Yeah.
So I guess that's why they remove this policy, and they even encourage people to have more kids.
Wow.
Like what happening in the Western world, I guess. Yes. But I would say people critique about that, but I think at that time there was a reason why they apply one-child policy. But it's definitely not a great policy.
Yeah.
But it might solve the problem at that time. But if you look it back, you think they might be a better...
They could have maybe tapered it off a bit sooner.
Maybe there'd be a better policy, or they can do it differently, I don't know. But I guess there should be a better way of doing that. Speaking of which, even though one-child policy was a thing at that time, as far as I know, a lot of people from countryside where the small town, as I mentioned before, China is too big. Actually, not everyone was following that policy.
Really?
That's the thing. So you might read from newspaper a lot of like rich people. Like that's the thing. If you only let me have one child, what you gonna do if I just get pregnant? What are you gonna do?
Okay, what do they do?
Yeah. You get fined.
You get fined? Really?
You get fined. That's the thing. So less people get angry because sometimes some rich people just pay the fine. I'll just want to have more kids. And also in some really less developed small country town, then I don't have money. Then what do you do?
What are you gonna do? Kill me?
What are you gonna do?
Yeah.
Yeah. So they actually end up have multiple kids as well. And especially in small country town, people tend to prefer having boys because that's the labor where you can do all this work. So when I went to the uni in China for undergraduates, some of my classmates from southern China, for those boys, many boys have older sisters.
What? So you're saying that a daughter is born, and they're like, we'll pay the fine for the son.
I don't even know if they paid for their
They're just
fine.
like, we don't care. We're gonna keep trying.
If they are just, we don't have money, then what are you gonna do with it?
Yeah.
Yes, right. So
it's one of the very few perks of being like borderline absolute poverty. Is you don't have to pay fines.
Yeah. Yes. And then those boys have sisters, especially older sisters, because their parents wanna have a boy, have someone to actually do the labor job and doing stuff. So yeah.
That is super interesting.
So very surprising, right? So I would say for one-child policy, maybe northern China did better than southern China. That's another story.
What can you explain to me the north versus south thing?
Well, everyone have different definition about northern China and southern China. Like, do you remember I said I never felt any sense of belonging when I went to Chinatown? Like,
you mean Melbourne Chinatown?
Any Chinatown.
Okay.
Like in Melbourne, the UK, whenever I go to Chinatown, I never felt I have sense of kind of connection with them. That's not the image of China in my mind. Because I'm from northern China, and in terms of Chinatown, historical reason, earlier most of the Chinese who migrate to Australia, UK, US are the people from southern China.
That's like I assume the wealthier side of China?
I would say first the wealthier, and also they're closer as well.
Okay, yep.
Yeah.
And that has like Beijing and Shanghai, I assume?
Well, I'm from somewhere northeast, so it's adjacent to Korea, so very north, I would say. So for me, I would say Shanghai is southern China. But then there's a joke for people who from Guangzhou.
Yep.
They'll think everyone is North China, only themselves is southern China.
Yeah.
So, but typically we just say based on the river. There's a river in the middle of China, then top
The
is
Yangtze, is that what it was called?
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah.
That's interesting.
But it's a very vague definition.
Yeah. So were you like actually on the border with North Korea? Or just nearabouts?
Very close, yeah.
Yeah,
It's
okay.
like a small country town is actually the border, so don't ask me the border thing, I don't know.
But did you see any Koreans?
So I'm from Dalian, which is a very popular coastal city, very touristy city in China, famous for all these coastal line and seafood and everything. And there are actually a huge amount of Japanese and Korean people working there, having business there. So I would say the Japanese food I had and Korean food I had in my hometown is exactly same as the Japanese food I had in Japan. Well, the Japanese in Australia, I would say is Australianized.
Yes.
So it's not very Japanese.
Yes.
Yeah.
I hate constantly hearing about the fact that any insight I get into these places in terms of the culinary culture and things like that, it's fake. It's a fiction.
Yeah.
It's like, damn it. Same with Italian food. Apparently Italian pizza in Italy is very different to what it is in Australia.
But I guess it has to be the case. Then what if it's so Italian that Australian doesn't like it?
That's a really good point.
I have to make my business alive, so I need to make the food. I need to make the Italian food that Australian like.
Yeah, right.
And I have to Australianize it.
Yeah, so you could have had two Chinese restaurants that were stood up in the same street. One was traditional. One was trying to find a way to just make it more palatable to Westerners, and that one succeeded.
Yeah, and in terms of Chinese food, they have 5 big Chinese cuisine.
Right.
Based on where they are, there are a huge difference. Like for example, one time when we had food outside, and people just asked me, do you have any like preference, whatever you want to eat? I said I can eat anything but not spicy. And then my friend said, but you're Chinese. So I would say,
is that like Szechuan?
Like a Sichuan, so Chuan Cai means the cuisine in Sichuan, that area.
Yeah.
That cuisine is famous for the spicy thing, like some of the stuff in that. Where in my area, like northeast China, like spice chili is rarely a thing on the table. So I'm not used to chili, so I just can't handle chili. That made people so surprised, like, why you can't eat chili even though you're Chinese? So same thing when I say I can't play table tennis, but you're Chinese. And same thing as I don't like bubble tea, but you're Chinese.
I think it might have been me who said the thing about table tennis at some point.
So that's when I realized people tend to have this stereotype of China.
Yeah.
They have this image of Chinese people. So their image about Chinese people is they're a single child.
Yep.
They like spicy food.
Yep.
They are wealthy.
Yeah, that's definitely true.
Yeah,
that's definitely.
They're wealthy and they like bubble teas. Yes.
What's up with the bubble tea thing? Is bubble tea, that's not from China, is it? Is that more of a Japanese thing?
I don't know. It just...
Yeah, I feel like bubble tea is actually just a new thing.
It's just like everywhere. It's just a new thing everywhere. Yeah. Like, I just personally don't like any sweet drink. And I don't like bubble tea, like soft drink, not really my thing. Yeah, so anyway, so that's the image in the Western world about China. If we go further, not like with small eyes, you can see some of the picture when they draw Asian people like small eyes, not very tall. So that's all the things about China. But then in terms of the height, I would say I'm from northern China, people from southern China, and people from northern China are normally taller.
Okay.
Taller.
And is that like an ethnic thing? Like Manchurians are taller?
No, I think that's the region thing.
Okay.
It's like why in the North Europe people are taller. It's just like
Dutch people.
Genetic thing. I remember when I was in secondary school, I have like this major extended class had 50 students, which is 25 boys, and only one boy is less than 6 foot.
What?
So yeah, people don't believe that when I say it. People don't believe it. That's true.
Really?
Yeah, and the only one, 6 foot, is that 6 foot 180 centimeters?
Roughly, yeah, it's a bit above that.
Yeah, that was it. Yeah, 180 centimeters. So only one boy is shorter than that, and he was the champion of high jump. So what you can say about it?
Wow.
Yes. So I'm used to like tall people. Like I am the smaller one in the class. I'm always in the front lines. Yeah. Yeah, but then that's not the case in southern China.
Right.
I was saying southern people are not necessarily as tall as people from the north. I think that's a thing. Is that people from north just a bit taller?
Maybe.
Because the coldness?
People make a lot of theories about like distance from the equator and how that relates to things, but I think most of them don't pan out very well. But who knows what would lead to someone being genetically taller? Like, why the hell do the Dutch need to be so tall? I've got no idea.
Like my province is Liaoning and Shandong. These two provinces are famous for people being taller. So that's the thing.
Is that if you're a guy on Tinder and you're from one of those provinces and you're like super tall, do you find it really easy to pick up chicks? Is that how that is that a thing that is like culturally known about people from that area, or is this not really that considered to be that big of a deal?
I think culturally they know, but then in terms of how much you like, in terms of people's height, it really depends on individual. Yeah. I would say. But then just like interestingly, I went to the secondary school, so I'm used to people of certain height. But then when I went to the university, it's the same city, but university have students come from everywhere, and then I just feel why everyone is shorter here. So it's very obvious.
That's so bizarre.
Yeah, but then you never think in this way if you're not grew up in China, and then you think differently. Even though you're from southern China, they would think that's very offensive. Yeah. But then that's true from me actually grow up in certain
they're comparatively shorter than the north. Yeah. It reminds me of when I went to high school in East Melbourne, like an hour from the city, and it was a Catholic high school, so it was a bunch of white people and Italians, and I suppose Italians are basically white people, but we had this idea that there was Chinese people in Australia. We were maybe competing with them in school because we just assumed that Chinese people were super smart if they're in high school in Australia. But it wasn't until I went to university that I found out just how multicultural Australia was, because it was heaps of Asians, Indians, white people, just a lot of different ethnicities in one place. And it was crazy that it took me so long to even just know that about my own country. I was in Melbourne. I was just an hour from the city. I didn't go to the city that often. And I went to university, I was like, holy crap, we are quite multicultural. That is interesting. So we're almost out of time. I want to know, I've got a couple more topics I want to hit on. Yes. But did you want to bring something up that you think would be worth tabling for discussion?
You can say first, and then I'll add on.
Okay, cool. So another controversial topic that I want to hit, and I hate to do this to you, but the Uyghur Muslims, Are you aware of that whole fiasco?
Oh, Muslim. That's the ethnicity I was trying to say.
When was this?
For one-child policy.
Yeah, so the Uyghurs were one of the ethnicities who were exempt from that.
Yeah, Muslim is one of the minor ethnicities as well.
Right. So a lot of people have gotten mad about what has been perceived as like concentration camps for the Uyghur Muslims. I think the idea is that they associate. I think they might have had some actual terrorist attacks in the area. In where the hell was this? The name escapes me. Was it Yunnan? Yeah. I think there might be some terrorist attacks, and the government associated that with the Islamic faith, and basically said, okay, we got to step in and re-educate everyone to be less Islamic, I believe was the idea. And so they had concentration camps, and this is disputed by the government, but there have been documents that were released that seem to verify that it was a real thing, and it was kind of messed up. I want to know, like, do you have a take on, like, it seems to me like sometimes the Chinese government takes a very heavy-handed approach to solving certain social problems, and at the very least, like, do you have an idea of, like, is that thing, like, common knowledge in China or the parts of China you lived in? Like, were people talking about those things?
Not much, but I have friends when I was in secondary school, even now, they're from that cultural background. They live a very happy life. They've never...
Even now, you mean? Like, are you in contact with them? Yep.
Yeah, but probably not in Yunnan.
Right.
Just in my country, city area. And I think that's never a thing actually really get my attention. So I really can't say much. But I will do some research and read some news and try to find out what it actually is.
Get to the bottom of it. Come back for episode 2.
Yeah, we'll do that after some research and study.
Cool. So another thing, hang on, I just forgot it. I gotta massage my brain to get this thing back.
Yeah, take your time.
I wanted to ask about the lab leak hypothesis of COVID. So some people have been saying that COVID came from a wet market because there was a bunch of different animals being sold there, and it's possible that the virus came from a pangolin or a bat or something like that.
Penguin? Did you say penguins?
Pangolin. I think it's called a pangolin. Is that how you pronounce it? Pangolin? I don't know.
I don't know what's that, but I thought you said penguins.
Let's not rule out penguins. I don't know where Wuhan is and whether it's...
No, we love penguins. We don't eat them.
Yeah, okay, that's good to know. So some people think it's from the wet market. Some people say it's from there's a lab down the road, or at least quite close to the wet market where they were doing virology testing and stuff like that. And I think this lab leak hypothesis used to be a lot more controversial, but it's become less controversial over time. For some, I don't know why. For some reason, I think it's become less controversial. Some major, places. I think the Washington Post did a piece on it. The Atlantic did a piece on it. The Atlantic definitely did. I don't know about the Washington Post. But do people in China, again, I'm just trying to use you as a conduit, as like as a measuring stick for what the sentiment is in China. Do people have strong opinions about that? Like, is it like a common thing to be like, screw anyone who thinks it was from the lab? Clearly that wasn't the case. That's just purely, speculation or just kind of like rabble-rousing.
I didn't think in that way, but people get very angry, scared, disappointed, and I think there's a lot of fear about COVID. I'm not sure if you know SARS. In 2014, I think I was in primary school. SARS is something similar like COVID, but less contagious. Yep. But like more serious. Like a lot of people actually died from SARS in 2014, and people are so scared of COVID. So when the COVID come out, like people definitely are interested where this thing come from. And another thing you might think is sometimes, even though in China, sometimes not people from North China blame people from South China. Another thing is because I would say in the North, the only meat we eat, beef, chicken, lamb, and fish.
It's the best kinds of meat.
And seafood. From my hometown, of course, seafood. I love seafood. That's it. But then sometimes in China, people joke around about some certain provinces in South, they eat everything. Yeah.
So is Wuhan in the south?
Yes.
I see.
In the south.
Right.
But not as south as Guangzhou and the further south. So no matter where COVID come from, people from my area were so surprised that there were even this wet market exist.
Right. It's similar with the dog festival thing, right?
That's the thing. So people blame this wet market, like how come in this 21st century there's a certain wet market exists? Why no one knows about it? Why the government?
The hell was that?
I think that's the robots.
That is terrifying. Continue talking. I'm trying to turn this thing off. What the
Just
hell?
leave it. I think that's fine.
It's got a camera on it.
And people are so angry, like why there's a thing exist? Why the government never ever close it? Like we were so surprisingly angry about it. It's not from the Western media. I think from your mind, maybe your image is there are wet market everywhere in China.
Yes.
Right? I wouldn't blame it because you don't know that. So yes, that's the thing. First, we're surprised. Why is even a thing exist? And second, how come it exists? And third, of course, there are the wild animal there. Of course, things gonna go wrong. Even though it's not 2019, that could be 2022, that could be 2025. Something will go wrong eventually with those wet markets.
Right. So there was internal conflict when this all broke out, where people were like, "What the hell, Wuhan? You guys got to get your shit together."
Yes.
Was there any talk about the potential of the lab leak though? Like, was anyone saying?
There are some conspiracy about that as well, but then it just never got proved.
Yeah.
But then I think it's just more likely to be the wet market thing because as a scientist or someone working in the science field, it's just it's something will happen eventually because people are taking more and more land, and then all the animals where in the past they have no chance encounter each other, but now because we are taking more and more land, so they have to squeeze in a small little place, and then they kind of interact. Things gonna get more messy sometimes. So I would just feel like that is something just gonna happen.
I wish there was an easy way as a Westerner to get
to know China, what the thing
to work out the differences, to work out, okay, wet market is just a thing in the south or in some parts of the south, and this thing's only happening in this region. You know what I mean? Spicy food only happens over here.
Yeah, that's the thing. This is a very internal thing.
Yeah.
Yes. And then if you talk to someone from China from different area, they might give you different ideas.
Yeah, exactly.
Well.
Yeah.
So, people talk about racism. I would say, in China, inside of the China, there are certain quotation mark racism, about people from different area. Like my parents, they are maybe older generation. When they talk about when you date someone, they prefer maybe dating someone from North China.
Oh man.
Just that's the thing.
You would if you as a parent these days, if you would say that to your kid, something along those lines, right? Like, you're going out with a Western Australian? Are you kidding me?
Yeah, that's the thing, right? So inside of the country, the story, the funny jokes around each other. You joke around, you joke about each other. But then it's just hard to let other people know that's the case, unless I think the only way just have some informations from different Chinese from different area, and then never overgeneralize based on their word. Only listen to that single slice
Yes,
of
yes,
the story,
yeah,
and only take that single side. Don't
yeah,
expand it.
yeah,
And then over time you get more information, and then you can see the conflict between different
yeah.
people's opinions as well. And then I guess that will make a difference.
Yeah, I think like even I assume if I was to talk to someone else from, is it called Dalian? So
Right? Yeah.
they might have given completely different answers to all of my questions, and that's
is an awesome city, but has some political thing going on in the past. Yeah, that's a very long story as well.
Okay,
Yeah.
we might need to park that for the next episode. So we're a bit over an hour now. So I guess I want to thank you very much for coming on the podcast. I'm sure it's not comfortable to be a punching bag for a bunch of things that your government's done. But is there anything you wanted to say before we wrap it up?
Just like one question. People sometimes talk about Chinese people don't like people talking about China, about the government. So is that a case? When you talk about China, something you realize someone becomes very offended and then try to fight back.
Yes.
I would say that's not wrong. And in the past, I used to do that as well. And then until one day, I just questioned why I do that. Because when I talk with my friends in China, we complain about the government all the time.
Yeah.
We complain about things, we say things, but then we don't really do the same thing when we're with people from different countries. So eventually I noticed sometimes whatever people feel about a government, they will pass that perspective and that emotion to Chinese people as well.
Yeah.
So I guess for Chinese people who are currently living overseas, they try to defend their country simply because they don't want people to look down China, because that eventually will become racism. People will look down to Chinese people as well. And it's really hard as a Chinese people living overseas. So they try to build a good, nice image of their own country. Eventually, they're protecting their friends from the same country.
Yeah, so
they can get a better.
Yeah, I think Australia had a taste of that when COVID happened, where as far as the rest of the world was concerned, we were like Nazi Germany, based on effectively like in just Melbourne. So like in Victoria, we had a very strict policy with lockdowns, and if you would, there was some bad things happening where people were getting spear tackled by police, and that was being uploaded to Facebook and Twitter and things like that. And it was interesting to see people would just say, "What the hell is happening in Australia?" It's like, actually, it's a small chunk of Australia, but it's not happening in Sydney right now. It's not happening in Queensland. Yes. So it's kind of the same thing where I watched Josh Zepps go on a couple of podcasts. I think he went on Joe Rogan's podcast and was explaining like, I criticize this stuff back at home, but when I'm here representing my country, I need to try and be a bit more careful and try and he doesn't want to be allowing for this sweeping generalization to be applied to his whole country. So I feel like that's a similar experience to what Chinese people have.
Yes. So in 2020, when I came back visiting my family back to Australia, that's where COVID just happened and became serious in Australia. And true story, I had friends just walking the streets in the city and got spitted on just because they were Chinese.
In Australia?
In Australia.
What?
And then there are Chinese people, their garage have people using like paint, like red paint, write things like go out of Australia and then just start eating people. They have all sort of the things happening towards Chinese people.
Wow.
A lot of things happening in Melbourne. Like I know my friends have this experience, and just because they used out their toilet paper, they brought toilet paper on the street, and people just like cursed them. Are you fucking Chinese? Blah blah blah.
Yeah.
And then, it's just like so sad seeing things happening. And I also know that 2 girls get punched.
What?
And they're not even from China. They're Indonesian, And then eventually,
I'm Japanese, idiot.
Think about it. Think about it. If you are Indonesian and you got like treated badly because people thought you'd be Chinese,
so pissed off.
Will you pissed off because of the Australian or because of Chinese?
That's a good question.
That's the thing. People turn out pissed off.
I think
Chinese.
It's probably.
They say, "Fuck off! I'm not Chinese."
Yeah.
And then eventually, those people who are mistreated as a Chinese will end up hating Chinese instead of hating the people who hate them.
Yeah.
So and I think at that time I got a lot of message from my Australian friends. They message, "Oh, Karry, are you alright? And you feel safe at the moment?" I just feel like sad and warm at the same time.
Yeah.
Oh, it even makes me want to cry. Yes. So I just feel maybe that's the whole reason why sometimes people want to like fight back.
Yeah. Well, it's been great, Karry. Thanks for coming on the podcast, and hopefully we'll do another one of these some other time. All right.
Thank you.
Bye all.